Uh, Hi, everyone. I'm Margaret Holm. I'm a board member with Things First Okanagan. We're a nonprofit volunteer climate action organization. I'm joined tonight by fellow board members, Lori Goldman. She's manning the Zoom controls, and Sue Kirschman, who's going to be introducing tonight's speaker in a couple of minutes. Deep Dive is a monthly online webinar where we try to explore different perspectives on climate solutions for our communities. So we're just talking to people living in communities around British Columbia and other places. We come to you from the traditional unceded territory of the Seal and the Similkameen Nations. And actually, June is Aboriginal month. And this Saturday, June 21st, is National Indigenous Peoples Day, and Indigenous communities throughout Canada are celebrating their heritage. So it's an opportunity for all of us to join in some of these celebrations. So a couple of things that are happening in our valley: the Inkameep Desert Cultural Center in Osuyas. They'll be showcasing traditional and contemporary Indigenous experiences, dance, drumming, storytelling. They're going to have local vendors there, and they're doing guided trail walks through their beautiful desert landscape down at Inkameep. And they are saying, please bring your friends, family, and bring your open hearts to stand with us in community and celebrate as we honor Seal Okanagan voices, stories, and traditions, and in the past, the present, and the future. And then up in Kelowna, the Kelowna Friendship Society, they're having a whole day Turtle Island Festival, local arts and crafts, vendors, food. They're going to have a mini powwow. It's a free event, and it's all day at the Kelowna Friendship Center at 422 Leon Avenue. And now I'm going to turn things over to Sue Kirschman, who's going to introduce tonight's speaker.
Thanks, Margaret. Hi, everyone, and welcome to tonight's deep dive. Our topic tonight, as you know, is permaculture. And I have to admit that until recently, I wasn't fully aware of what permaculture is. I understood it to be a sustainable method of agriculture, but I now know that it's much broader than that. There are a lot of definitions, but one that I read was that it's a sustainable design approach that mimics natural ecosystems to create self-sufficient, regenerative, and productive environments. And it very much aligns with climate action and emission reduction goals as it reduces waste, prevents pollution, it maximizes sustainability, protects wildlife, and improves the land's resiliency and biodiversity. Our guest speaker, Kenton Zerbin, will explain this all more fully to you. Kenton is a permaculture educator, designer, and advocate for regenerative living. He's a former school teacher turned international sustainability leader, and he teaches people how to build efficient homes, thriving landscapes, and resilient communities. Kenton has built his own off-grid tiny home. He's designed edible landscapes for individuals and communities, and he founded the Attainable Sustainable Academy. And this is a school whose mission is to change the world, one person, one property, one community at a time. Before Kenton begins, just a couple of things. If you have any questions, just type them into the chat and we will pose them to Kenton after his talk. And also, there's no need for you to copy down information or save the chat because Lori will be sending out a video of tonight's presentation, and along with it will be links to any of the interesting points that come up during the discussion. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Kenton. Please go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you and welcome all. It's a pleasure to be here with you here tonight. I have the pleasure and also the challenging task to try to summarize permaculture for you in about 45 minutes. Now, I'm up for the challenge, but know that this is a bottomless topic. It is the study of all systems. So, towards a practical end of how do we live on this planet in a way that is beyond sustainable. So I'm going to do my best to crash course you through. I'm going to go at a fairly good clip. I do love your questions, though, and I'm going to have to probably just nip myself in the butt at some point and call her quits so we have room for questions because we definitely want to get some of that engagement. And if there's anything you're unclear about or use jargon you're not familiar with, chances are someone else is having the same, what the heck did he say? Or what does that mean? And don't hesitate to ask it. Do, because, yeah, if you're thinking it, someone else is as well. Okay, So let's go ahead and share my screen, and I've got some introductions I'm going to do as a part of that. Make sure that is displaying for you guys. I got a thumbs up on that. Looks good. Okay, so I've clicked share my screen. You should be able to see it now, and I should be able to navigate through my controls. Aha! Okay, so welcome. Introduction to Permaculture. Now, in this talk, I have a kind of a structure, a process we're going to go through. First, I got to tell you a little bit of who I am. I think this is important. I've got my own biases. Same way as when you pick up a book, the author should say something about themselves so you know who they are, what their biases are. Well, I want to tell you a little bit of my story and journey, how I came to be in front of you here today. Then, of course, I need to give you my own definition of what permaculture is and why it's so important in our world today. I think this is actually a beautiful group to be doing a talk for. Um, First things first, and addressing climate change is such an important thing in our world today, and permaculture has a very unique role in flipping the script and putting climate change back in the individual's hand. And I mean that in a very empowering and positive way. We're constantly reminded of the world's problems, and often people feel disempowered to change them. But when it comes to individual landscapes, we have the capacity to be a keystone species, the same way a beaver does. That it can change the hydrology of a landscape, and change that nutrient shed, ensure biodiversity. And in doing so, it makes a habitat that it can thrive in. This is our role and challenge today is how do we improve lands? Disprove a narrative that we are a negative force on this planet, and of course we'll change the climate. Because when you change landscape, you change climate. Water is a battery for temperature, and we've often taken a lot of water out of our landscapes. Permaculture is a lot about how do you put that water back and then create life. And yes, when you put that water back, it creates microclimates and changes your local climate and at a large scale, your larger climate. So yes, climate change is in our hands and it's in our backyards, and it's a positive thing and an exciting thing that we get to embrace, not something we got to get guilt tripped over and say, we got to change, drive less, do this, do this. It's like, no, let's grow some food. Let's make biodiversity. Let's make lands that are so rich that we get to thrive off of their interest instead of their capital. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox now and come back to the presentation. So who am I? How did I get to be in front of you here today? So they mentioned my training. Yes, I was trained first as a teacher. And when I got to the school system, I had lots of questions. I mean, I was passionate about a teacher. There was being a teacher. I grew up in a very interesting situation, to be honest. My mother was a social worker. I always joked that she brought work home. I have 6 adopted siblings, 4 biological siblings, and over 100 foster siblings. It's quite a crazy house, as you can imagine. And over that whole time, I became an uncle over 20 times. And that taught me really quickly I wanted to work with kids. And I believed in giving back to my world the same way my parents did so passionately. So becoming a teacher was a natural choice for me. But getting to the school system, I started to question, why are we teaching what we're teaching to kids today? And I didn't always have a good answer. The problem was I didn't know what the answer should be. I didn't know the answer to look for. I didn't see a curriculum that I believed in. I had a curriculum I was told to teach. I could see the rationale behind it, but I could see so many other problems in our world, and I didn't see the education system as stepping up. So I took this first training called the Master Composter Recycler Program. It's through the city of Edmonton, and it was a great training, to be honest, but it focused on how do we do less bad. How do you recycle and how do you take your organic matter and divert it from the landfill? So it's not saying that that's what recycling or composting has to be, because both those things can be about producing something. But again, I feel like in our society, we're constantly reminded, do less bad instead of how to do optimal good. Now, I did become a master, not just master recycler, but also the master composter, and that includes doing a worm compost. So this is actually me in my tiny house here with my worm bin that I still have. Still have this bin. It's been going for 9 years straight, and it's just sitting down there. I'm up in my tiny house loft right now. Now, looking for something else, though, that wasn't about just reducing our negative impact, that's when I came across permaculture. And I took a talk on it, much like you are right here, right now. And to be honest, that changed my life. it was a moment that I can clearly go, this was before and this is after. From that moment, I now had an answer. I had something to study. I had something to look into. And indeed, I was just stoked about it. I started a club for permaculture at the high school I was teaching at. But when my contract finished at the high school, I chose not to go for another contract. I wanted to go become an expert in permaculture. I wanted to teach it full time, not just a club. So I went to Australia, was there for a full year, traveling and working around, basically finding the spots where I could learn from the world's best. Australia is a bit of a hotbed for permaculture. The term was coined in the 70s by a man named Bill Mollison from Tasmania, Australia. And of course, his early works and his efforts made Australia still today one of the leaders for permaculture. So that's why I went there. And I spent the whole year just traveling around, seeing how people who were building their homes, how they were creating landscapes, and yeah, also creating communities. It was very inspiring. However, it wasn't home. It was a lot of subtropical Australia. So after I spent that year, I decided, let's go across Canada. Let's do the same thing. And I had an amazing experience doing that for a full year as well. I got to work on earth ships. If you guys are familiar with those, they're like hobbit holes from Lord of the Rings. You build into the earth, borrow from its temperature. It's much easier to heat and cool a house, borrowing from beneath the temperature of the frost zone. I got to work on straw bale homes, not like the ones in the Three Little Pigs, but the ones that are super durable. You could crash a car into them, and they're probably gonna be in better shape than a typical house. And those are one of my favorite ways of building a home. Also, tiny homes and yurts and all sorts of other alternative structures, in addition to seeing people's landscapes. It was an amazing year. Now, at that point, I thought, you know what, I'm going to come back home now. I'm going to come back home to Alberta, where I was calling home at the time, and start up my business teaching others. And I unfortunately, fortunately, was not able to do that. Well, not that I wasn't able. Someone passed me a job application and said, "Hey, this looks like it was made for you. They need someone who's a teacher, who did the training you did in Australia, who's going to have flexibility to go to do a 3-year project to start a school for permaculture in Barbados." Twist my arm. I found myself on an airplane with a 3-year work visa, UN support. We had $75,000 that they provided us, government support. We had 16 acres of land the government was giving us. We also had some people high up who really wanted to see a school for sustainability there. They import in Barbados over 80% of their food, and they export over 80% of what they produce. So they have a massive issue agriculturally in terms of self-sufficiency and sustainability. So we ended up training over 100 designers on the island. It was an amazing experience. People who were going into agriculture, were looking to make more sustainable food productions out of their humble lots or their bigger acres. And it was a very, very meaningful time for me. However, it was just another stint in the journey. Coming back from that, I went, well, what kind of house do I want? And I chose to design and build this tiny house that you see that I'm actually calling from inside right now. So I live in an off-grid tiny house. It's 260 square feet. It's pretty small, but it allows me to live debt-free with very low impact. And from this place, I'm able to travel around the world and help other people. Not just with tiny homes, of course, although I focused on that for a while, teaching workshops across Canada, doing a YouTube show for a free house giveaway, all this stuff that I've done, lots of projects for sure. Here's the inside of my house. I'm calling from where the camera is in this picture. I can look down that way and see the same view you guys are. Although it's a little more messy when I look this way than what you see in the picture. I don't always keep it this clean, right? Now, while I was after I finished my house, I got a lot more time then when I wasn't working full time on a house build and design. And here's a couple sites and projects that I've been a part of over the years. They're going to come up a little bit in the presentation, but it's nice to still show you a couple of them. This is a food forest in St. Albert that we designed on city land. It's a completely edible landscape that's free for anyone to go into and pick. It was built on a shoestring budget with plenty of donations, some funding, and the city support. So really exciting to show a precedent of a municipality saying, "Great, you guys make it edible. You want to use it? Go for it." You don't always find municipalities that open about using a space like that. This is a First Nations community called Beaver Lake, Northern Alberta, and we did a food forest design for them. They had a community space that was underutilized, and so we planted over 200 fruit trees and shrubs with this small group that you see right here. Had a little potluck and a barbecue, and everyone left not only with their hands tired from planting trees, but a sense of community and pride around their own food sovereignty, which they had secured that day. I also have done some work with some just cool clients. Sometimes they have money, sometimes they don't. This is a client who was doing a whole retrofit of their whole backyard landscape, beautiful little spot. They had all this leftover stone that I took and used to make a living sculpture called a herb spiral, which will come up a little later in the presentation. You can see me doing the first row of rocks, laying the foundation for where all these herbs are going to go. And then this is the Living the Off-Grid Dream property that I got 6 months to work on up in Rock Creek, BC. And one of my last tasks that I did for them before I left was to make them a trail network to share with their Airbnb guests. So this is another type of client that I help now these days, is some people want to have Airbnb and a side hustle on their land. And I go, okay, how do we make this a wow space? How do we make this something that's going to be worthy of news attention in terms of its sustainability or its creativity or the experience it provides guests without compromising the landscape? So making a trail network system for guests to go and wander around on their property was a pretty cool experience. I helped them also dig that pond that you see in the picture. That's now full of water. I got the experience to actually dig that with one of their excavators. So that tells you a little bit of my journey into doing permaculture for other people, communities, clients, backyard, gardens. It's been a crazy journey, but my passion has always laid with education. How do we share this movement as quickly as possible with as many people as possible and put power in people's hands? So whether it's tiny homes like this course that you see here in Toronto, or whether it's the one we just did in Ontario or the one we did previously in Colombia, I'm teaching around the world to try to provide this movement to people and really kickstart this movement. I dropped a little line about this one. I'll make sure we put the link in for it and get it to you guys in the follow-up email. But I did build a house over COVID as part of a YouTube show, and here it is. You are one of the first people to see this picture. I have not shared it much. This is the completed house. It's valued at over $200,000. Took an incredible amount of time to build because it was all built with sponsored materials. Everything on there was free or costed a little bit of money in terms of in bits and pieces. But it basically is an inspiring story how community built a home that we could give away. So you can enter to win this house. My project after that was to build up the online school. And that's where I'm really calling from really today in a way. It was running courses, as I said, for under Attainable Sustainable Academy to make this as accessible to as many people as possible. So there's the journey. Okay, so we danced around this what is permaculture? You hear, obviously, I'm passionate about it. You see, I took some major shifts in my life to be a teacher for it. You did get a definition at the beginning of this meeting, but I want to give you another one. I find this is a very holistic one in terms of helping define what permaculture is and what it's not. Permaculture is first and foremost a design science. Everything that we do is explainable, repeatable, provable. There's no belief system required. This is very important because it needs to be adopted by the masses around the world. And it doesn't need to be something that we can contest and go, oh, that's spirituality or that's woo-woo or that's why you're doing this. We need everything to be very acceptable in terms of the larger people not being able to refute it. How we use it is critical. I can teach you how to build a watershed, how to make sure water stays in a larger landscape so that it can produce an incredible amount of food, and therefore its productivity would be higher. You'd hope its biodiversity would be higher. But you could use that same knowledge to take more out of that landscape. And that would be an unethical use of a permaculture technique, of permaculture design. how to create a holistic, awesome watershed so that you can just take from it more. So the guidings of ethics of earth care first, then people care, and then a return of surplus is super important and the backbone of this movement. We also claim to be no gurus. Yes, there are people who have taken the time to really learn from nature, or taken time to travel around the world and learn from some of the leading experts, or taken the time to study indigenous peoples around the world and what allowed them to last for thousands of years where many other cultures did not. But at the end of the day, the ultimate teacher is nature. That the answers are already all there. How do we live with this larger landscape? It can teach you. And so we often say that we are inspired by nature. We are taking techniques for food growing, home building, community building, and there's inspiration directly around us for how to do those systems without reinventing the wheel. And I'll give you an example. If we take a look at our modern food growing system, we often are trying to take the ground to square zero, whether it's gardening or it's monoculture. We go, oh, okay, let's get good garden soil, let's till this land, let's take out the trees, and then sometimes it goes further. Let's use this insecticide, let's use this pesticide, let's use this, to try to get to some blank slate, and then force things to grow that we really like to eat. Now, that's not how nature grows. And so when we look at, okay, if we want to make food that's less work, how could we copy nature to get there? Welcome to the concept of a food forest. The idea of a food forest is that a forest is self-replicating, self-fertilizing, self-watering. It's resilient in the face of climate change. It's a haven for biodiversity. So that there is a very good system. And we could use that for inspiration to structure a food system. You can start substituting species, taking out one that you think may not have as much use to you, likely does, you just don't know what they are. And you could put in something that's fruit bearing and go, okay, now I've got these different heights, spacings, biodiversity, species, and it replicates how a natural forest system thrives and works, but now you have extra outputs that you consider desirable. It's a very fascinating movement, and we can talk a little bit more as we go into the talk. But I want to give that as an example of how you can be designing a system for food that's inspired by nature. I like saying at the end of this too, for meeting the needs of humanity to the benefit of the environment. We of course are looking to look after our own needs. But if we don't benefit the environment, then we're a parasite. And that needs to be something we own. We need to own that we are accountable to things like, are we losing soils or building them? Are we losing biodiversity or increasing it? Because if we don't come back to those metrics, we're just tinkering around and moving the chairs on the Titanic. We need to be accountable to increasing our environment so it can support us. And it can thrive, we can thrive. Okay, so that is a good overview quickly in terms of my definition of permaculture, helps put some definition and boundaries on what is and what isn't permaculture. This is the larger course as I normally flow through it. So what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to actually take you through each major topic of the course, but I'm going to just touch on each one with a point or two, so you really get some takeaways, some tangibles, but you see the bigger picture. So first and foremost, I teach people how to live with Earth, that there is a larger pulse that's always happening, and we need to own that we are in one of three categories of relationship relative to our environment. We either are in a relationship which is mutual, we increase and enjoy the benefit, and our landscape does as well, kind of like how a bee and a flower co-evolve together. We could be in a relationship that's commensalism, which means one is fairly neutral and one gets a positive. You might say, oh, this might be an example of commensalism here on the screen, but it's actually not. Either that tree gets a negative from the bird or it gets a positive. Either that bird, for example, will take a shit and it'll drop down to the roots of the tree and it will feed it. That's a microtransaction that's valuable to that tree. And yes, the bird would love to get the food, the shelter, the home, the protection, the microclimate. Who knows how many benefits the bird gets? But there usually is very few examples, if any, that you can find of true commensalism. It's either mutualism or being a parasite. And this is, again, one of those things we have to challenge ourselves as a species, as cultures, as individuals and go, am I a parasite? And if I don't want to be, how will I prove that I'm not? The word sustainability, in my opinion, is more in this commensalism category. To sustain isn't very inspiring. We need to do away with this word, and we need to bring back words like regeneration and thrive. I know they get a little hippy dippy and wooey wooey, and people like to take these words and use it for all sorts of things, but at the end of the day, they are more semantically charged with something that's positive, and that's what we need right now. At the end of the day, we need to work with nature. Nature always wins. It's the larger force that we live within and we return to. So the study of nature is ultimately a study of permaculture. That brings me to training you how to be your own designer. So there is three key things I need to introduce you to. And if you take nothing out of this talk at all, but these three, I'll be happy. These are the three that you really need to. So write these down, try to integrate this as much as possible. Remember this as the most important things to how to practice permaculture landscape design. There's a saying, by the way, I put a little saying often at the top of each of these sections. Work is a failure of design. And most people like that quote. You can design the work out. So if you're ever working too hard, question yourself and go, how do I take that as feedback to change the system that I have made for myself? So the three key concepts to understand are sectors, zones, and relationships. There's different terms for this last one. Functional interconnectivity is a great word combo, but it's a mouthful. Essentially, though, you're going to be playing Dr. Phil. You're going to be putting things together so that they fall in love with each other in your landscape in a way that they both benefit each other. A good example of this would be companion planting. That's a term some people might be familiar with. Might be familiar with the Three Sisters, planting combination. This is a term that's come up a bit more, I think, in the last, we'll say, a dozen years. And for those who aren't familiar with it, the idea is you can put two plants next to each other for their benefits, like marigolds with tomatoes. The marigold scent will confuse the things that might want to eat your tomatoes, so they're better together. Well, there's actually 9 different ways in a systematic approach you can companion plant things together. However, it does not matter if you put your marigolds next to your tomatoes if they're not in a spot that has sun. Right? So this is a great example of how we work from the first concept into the second and finally into the third. And this is very important. I'm going to stress this. A lot of permaculture fails where someone says, oh, I tried permaculture or I tried this technique. It's not the technique that makes it work. It's the larger design system using that technique. So I can teach you about a swale or a hugelkultur or a herb spiral or companion planting combos, but if you don't put them with sectors in the right place, it doesn't matter. Zones is more about human efficiency. So sectors is nature's flows of energy, zones is human flows of energy, and relationships is the placement of two things next to each other for positive relationships. Okay, let's take a closer look at these. Sectors, there are many. Fire, wind, water, sunlight, wildlife, other humans. These are all sectors. They're flows of energy that will impact your site. The big three, though, are sun, wind, and water. Now, the sun, I cannot stress how important this is, and this is actually a very timely talk because we are on the precipice of our summer solstice. Tomorrow, I think at around 7 p.m. my time, 7 something, is that turning point when the days start to get shorter. There are only 4 major solar events in the year, the equinoxes and these 2 solstices, and they are very important for dividing the year into quarters relative to what is the land doing, what is the pulse of water, what is the pulse of the sun going to do. And that impacts our homes, that impacts our food, that impacts our activities, all of it. So you can see in this picture how where a lot of us might live in Canada, that's probably not too far off from how that sun moves across the sky at these different times of the year. So this right here, the June solstice, would be where we are tomorrow. The longest day of the year, a lot of sunlight, not a lot of nighttime, a lot of warmth. And then we go towards September and March 21st, which is our equinoxes. That's our day when everyone experiences equal night. And then we have our winter solstice, where the day is short. And that is, of course, very important relative to our home placement because we love to get as much of that sunlight in as possible. So here you see a house and garden and solar array all designed strategically around that sun. There's a stacking effect towards that southern sun. Let's go back a second. You can see that there's a predominant direction towards the south here. A lot of people know this. The sun comes from the south. But how do we take that fact and bring it home? Literally. This is a great example. That is maximum solar production. That is strategic placement of shrubs and vining things in front of that window. Can you see the net? There's a net in front of their window for things to trellis up. So now they have plants that are turning what would otherwise be solar heat from going in their front window into food, needs and yields. And then, of course, they've got their garden beds that you can see. The wind is also something to be reckoned with, both in the cold times, but also in the summer. It's important to know where is it coming from in those different times of the year and plan accordingly. You would never stand outside yourself without a coat on in a wind corridor in the middle of winter time. Why do we expect our homes to? The wind can be broken before it gets there, and that will, yes, increase or decrease, sorry, your heating bills. It can also decrease the strategic placement of trees, your cooling bills in the summertime. So trees are your first line of defense for climate stability. And that's not just from a, hey, let's save the climate. That's from a, hey, your wallet. This is going to save you money. Your very vested interest. Now, you can get different ways to map the wind on your property. You can look up windrows, like ROSE. This is a windrose. Airports often will produce this data for you and be tracking it over the years. And it will tell you the direction of the wind, the temperatures, and the strengths in a nice infographic. So you can see from this one, this is true for a lot of North America, we have a cold northwest wind. And that's very valuable information for you. However, I can tell you that, but where you live, it's completely dependent, right? What the hillsides, the trees, the buildings, the microclimate you're in, that wind could come from the complete opposite direction for all I know. So, the best way is stick up that finger and check. Get that wind vane and actually note. I think, again, nature's the teacher, right? So nature will tell you where that wind is coming from. Here's an example of strategic placement of deciduous and coniferous trees around a house. And you can see how it shunts up the cold winds coming from the north and the west over the property, allowing that house to stay warmer. And then they have deciduous trees on the east and the west side of the house. So when they're full of leaves in the summer, they cool the house. Who knew landscaping was so important for home design and climate change? Water is a huge topic into itself, and we're going to touch on that one in a little bit. But mapping water and how it moves across our property, this is a contour map, and you can see the visualization from it from the 2D to the 3D. I'm going to explain why that's so important in the next topic. All said and done, you can map all of the sectors out, and you can be like a general, looking at your property from above using Google Earth or your real property report or whatever mapping device or tool you have at your disposal. And you can go, the sun comes this way, the wind comes this way, the noise comes this way, and suddenly you have something to start your home and property design around, or improvements. So first start with sectors. They're hard to change or can't be changed. We then want to plan for human efficiency. So zones is this concept of basically feng shui. How do we plan for things so that it's easy on us to use them and it feels energetically smooth? You basically put things that you interact with more frequently closer to your home. So in zone 1, you should put your market, your garden, your main food growing, your chickens. Your compost could even go in zone 1, depending on how many times you're taking your compost out. You should not put your compost in zone 5, the furthest point on your property. This is what we call a classic failure in permaculture, that you need to go to this thing maybe, 2, 3 times a week, depending on how often you're emptying your compost. And now you have to walk the whole way, and now you're probably not managing or seeing that compost correctly, and therefore it smells. Compost should not smell. So zones is a great way to break up your property into clumps, and those clumps help you then place individual things based on your level of interaction. So here are two examples. You can see one here of more of a city lot, how they've broken up in these blocks of color. Zone 2 being the front yard, right? You don't need it to be the place they go all the time, but they still may want to look good, or maybe still have some seating out there, still going by it all the time because the driveway's there and the walkway. But Zone 1 is off the back deck of the house, which makes sense. You know, that's where you sit, that's where you socialize, maybe where you cook, maybe you grow your food. Zone 3 is in the side of the house. They don't go there as often. And then they have two Zone 4s. I'm not sure why, but both are a little further away, obviously. This is a more of an acreage house. And you can see how they have a Zone 1 area right smack dab in the middle there. That's their house and the area immediately beside it. And you can see the Zone 2 extends around that. Zone 3 is all pasture, intensive grazing, silvopasture area. Zone 4 is a wood lot. And Zone 5 is the creek area. And this again allows them to divide their property up and remind themselves when they're working too hard, am I splitting my energy across too much of the property? Do I have multiple zone 2s all over the place? Because you can bring those things together and then you're going to make your energy more efficient. This is common sense stuff in a way, but it just gives you a lens to suddenly look at how to manage your property and set it up that is irrefutably logical. Now we get into the good stuff. Now we get into like the placing of everything and getting the cool techniques and nerding out. I'm going to share with you a couple techniques just to explain how they work, why they're awesome. And remember, sectors, then zones, then the placement of these things. The first is square foot gardening. This is a gardening technique that is dear to my heart because it has permaculture baked into it. Essentially, why are we growing things in monocultures and rows and then having lots of pest issues? Yes, there's some efficiencies in it, and yes, it's tempting to, but when you plant things together, you get all these different benefits. Soil sharing the different nutrients in the soil, not attracting the same diseases, the same pests. You get all sorts of beneficial pollinators. You attract the beneficial bugs you might want. You deter the bugs you don't want. It's a baked in with so many good needs and yields, relationship placement by just putting things together in a square foot bed. Now, when I say square foot bed, there's no one recipe here, but typically people build a 4 foot by 4 foot bed, and then they put some sort of delineator across it like you see here. So every square is a square foot. And then that's really easy to seed. It's really easy to plant. It's really easy to see what's a weed and what's not. And heck, it looks nice on the eyes. It also keeps you from stepping on this area because you've got a little raised bed. And now you're not dealing with compression in the soil, and you can focus on building good soil in this one location. It's a great system. Lots of good relationships can be baked into that. Companion planting galore. The chicken tractor is a great example of how we value an animal. And there's so much opportunity in the animal systems that we have because often we take them out of their natural landscape, take over all their needs, and honestly practice a lot of animal cruelty. A lot of the animal farming that happens on the world today is terrible. But here we have a system that allows these chickens to have the equivalent of like a free range, but not a free range experience, where you have a wheeled coop that you get to move around and they always get the fresh bugs and scratch the grass and not are standing in their own crap. And now they're doing work for you because they're preparing the ground where you're going to put a garden or plant a tree. They've de-weeded it, they've de-seeded it, they've fertilized it by crapping all over it, and they scratched it up, aerating it for you. That's a great hard-working creature instead of just sticking it in an area where it stands in its own dung. Which, come on, we can do better than that. So, a great way to place chickens back into the landscape. If you want another idea for chickens, by the way, I love this one. If you have fruit trees and you allow your chickens to free roam, instead of giving your chicken the feed directly to supplement their diet, often we're looking to increase egg production so we give them extra food. Take that same feed and throw it around the base of your fruit trees. You'll get the same benefit. The chickens will run around the base of the fruit trees, scratch around to find those bits of extra food, degrass it, crap there more, giving fertilizer to the tree, and suddenly you've got those creatures still put to work without the tractor. This is one of my favorite temperate climate techniques. It's called a hugelkultur. And essentially what you're doing is building a compost pile in the ground. Why are we doing composting? separately and then moving it. So we're double moving it, sometimes triple, quadruple moving it. It's a lot of material to move around. That's a lot of back work, elbow grease. So what we can do is we can bury it. If you include large logs as a part of it, those large logs can take 10 to 15 years to break down. And now you have a self-fertilizing system for 10 to 15 years. And they hold good water. So this is fantastic for water security because the wind and the sun can't get to that same log, and a log is a sponge for water. If you ever pick up a log in the forest, you can see how wet it gets. So awesome solution for composting, growing food, increasing surface edge. You actually are increasing your area you get to grow on, creating microclimates. The spots at the top get higher and drier. You can face this thing to the sun different directions, south or north, east and west. There's so many ways to use it. And it's easier on the body because you're basically building a raised bed. Love this technique. Can't talk about it enough. One caveat worth mentioning about this. If you build one of these, make sure you get a variety of organic materials possible. So what you can do is you're going to take the grass, you're going to put it to the side, if you're digging out the grass, right? If you have that to start with. You're going to dig down maybe a foot, maybe two. Careful going too deep. You're going to get a lot of work for yourself. Throw down at least one big log and then start packing other organic matter around it. Grass clippings, leaves, garden scraps, manures, anything you get your hands on. Think of it like a stew or a good soup. A soup that's just got peas and water is pretty boring, right? So stick as many different types of organic matter in there, you're going to build better soil. Also need to make sure you've got good nitrogen sources in there. So add those grass clippings, add that chicken manure. There's a few different things that are more nutrient rich in nitrogen because that carbon matter of the tree you're putting in there is very rich in carbon and it will stifle decomposition processes. So if you add the nitrogen back in, you'll see a higher yield on your first, particularly your first year or two of the crop that you have on top. Otherwise, you might see that crop suffer because that wood is taking all the nitrogen from the surrounding soil. Okay, I want you to apply everything that I've taught you. I'm going to put you guys on the spot. What I'm going to need you to do is, I don't want you to hit enter, but you're going to go over to the chat. So open up the chat in the call. And I want you to identify one thing that you see in this picture. Don't hit enter though. So write it out. I see blank in terms of good sector placement. The sun is being used here. How maybe the wind, or maybe good zonal design. Is there a way this is efficient for human use? Or see something that's in this picture that's been placed there and notice how it benefits something else it's close to. So don't hit enter, just put your answer in the chat. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give 30 seconds for people to stare at the picture and come up with their answers. And then we'll all hit enter together because this way everyone's accountable and everyone gets a chance to not just riff on each other. Okay, let's give you a couple more seconds. Let's do a little countdown, then we'll all hit enter together and let's go through some of your answers and see if we can together be permaculture designers and take apart what makes this landscape awesome. Maybe we'll come up with some better ideas even. Okay, let's all hit enter on 3, 2, 1. Awesome. Seeing it coming. I love it. Okay. Greenhouse facing east. Fantastic answer, Val. So we have a greenhouse on this side. That allows not just for the morning sunlight to hit it, which is more ideal coming out of the cooler nights, but the sunlight to be blocked from the house, which is on the western side of it. So as the day gets hotter, the house actually adds like a shading element. Now, we could take this further and say maybe there's a door between the house and the greenhouse. There might be some moisture issues to consider here, but this could be a solarium now. You could actually open the door and use this as a heating device to heat up the home at different times. Super cool. All right. Deciduous trees for shade? Heck yeah. Look at this big deciduous tree. Good one, Lori. This big tree on the west side is going to stop this sun from overheating the house in the second half of the day. We also have a big one behind the greenhouse. Now, while that doesn't shade the greenhouse, there is reflection off of the greenhouse. And this is micro design at the next level. But if you have this as a fruit-bearing tree, you are going to see increased yields from this fruit-bearing tree because of the presence of reflection off of water and glass. Whoa, cool. The left side's winding pathway make it easy to reach all the individual plants in between the rows. Yes, you've increased edge. You've brought that really close to the front door, and you made this more of zone 1 area. Versus over here, this is like contemplation. This is naturalization. So they have in their front yard potentially a zone 1 and a zone 5 next to each other. Very good. Okay. What else do we got? The pond. Yeah, there's things you can say about this pond. There's a lot of things we can say about this pond. One thing I like about this pond is the interplay of the edge. So often when people do pond design, they go, how much water can I hold? And they make a big hole. For move as least amount of earth to get the most amount of container. That is indeed a benefit if your goal is to hold as much water as possible. But if you're going to try to create as much biodiversity as possible, it's not. The edge is where biodiversity thrives. So when you create this undulating, crenulated design to a pond, you actually increase the shallows. You increase these areas where you get the interplay between land and water, and you see more biodiversity. That water also has a benefit of temperature stabilization, providing cooling for the house and the greenhouse. You get the reflection we mentioned. And even the interplay of some of the things you see on that pond. Rocks on the edge of a pond will heat up in the morning sunlight and create a microclimate in the water right next to them. So you can actually create these little microbiomes in a pond just by how the edges touch something like a rock. Okay. So those are just a couple things to point out how this little lot is a good permaculture little demonstration of a good design of sectors, zones, and relationships. I know we spent a lot of time there, but that was needed because everything now after makes more sense. So water and life. Placing water in our larger landscapes is critical. That it is the fuel. It's the gasoline behind our biodiverse ecosystem. We need to plan for water appropriately. And this is something that gets done ass backwards in development. Usually what happens is people go, I want the house here. Then they figure out how to get road, and then they figure out how to get water to and from it. And the other way to do it is to go, how does water move through this landscape? Knowing that first allows you to put access ways that don't wash out, that are efficient, that complement those waterways. And then structures would obviously go along those prime access ways. I always like to tell people playing with water in your landscape is like a marble maze. How can you make this water zoom all over the place and go and touch as many things as possible? Because it wants to leave because of gravity as fast as possible. And we often enable that. We drain our landscapes and then we're left using stuff from the tap. It doesn't make any sense. It's a very expensive part of energy efficiency of our larger systems. Think how much energy goes into moving and cleaning water. It's crazy. This is a technique to counteract that. It's called a swale. It's basically a ditch, but it's level on the bottom of it. So it equalizes water. Water spills into it from uphill, spreads sideways across the land following a contour line. That's what it has to be built on because it can't go uphill or downhill. It needs to go sideways. And that allows that water to spread out, soak in, and become undersurface flow. A great combo is to put a tree on top of that mound of earth on the downhill side. Because now you've got double topsoil, you've got this water system that's rich in the ground, and it's going to produce shade, which is going to preserve more of that water. Amazing technique. Here I am building one in Australia for a client that had 2 acres. We turned his 2-acre property into a food forest with 282 fruit trees and shrubs of 80 different varieties. Here you can see 6 weeks later what that swale looks like, filled with water, and the cover crops we put down. And here you can see it 3 years later, all those fruit trees and shrubs popping up. It's pretty amazing property. A swale, we put 3 of them across his 2 acres, is what allowed what normally is a drought risk area to become basically drought proof. Here's a aerial picture, not of the same property, but I love this picture for showing you how ponds and swales can be interconnected so that you basically do that marble maze, but with water. The water is moving from any of these ponds over to another pond, then it drops down, goes to the next pond, drops down, goes to the next pond, and that water is now enriching that land as many times as possible before it leaves. I'm going to fly over this one. Home basics is important, but unless you are rebuilding your house or building a home, I'll teach you really quickly what the key words are you need to know. These 5 concepts are critical for building a house anywhere in the world. They are solar orientation. First, pivot your house to complement and work with the sun. Then it's how do you plan around where your windows go on your house? This is called glazing. Then it's where do you put thermal mass in your house? Thermal mass is the ability of a material to absorb and store heat. So you can make a heat battery inside your house that allows your temperatures to stay consistent. Then you put insulation on a house. And you make sure you understand what's good insulation and where it should be, how to break things called thermal bridging. Especially important for the cold climates of the world. Then it's ventilation. How do you make sure your house breathes? If you understand those 5, you can build a house anywhere in the world. Here's a picture showing a house relative to the solar orientation. Here's a picture showing how you design construction of thermal mass. They have a thermal mass wall of brick, a thermal mass floor, glazing on the right side of the house to allow that heat energy in and store it into the floor. And things like ventilation can be fixed often even in after the point. So this is a very simple power tip for you. This could save you hundreds of dollars in heating and cooling every year. Just get these little plugs that stick in your electrical outlets. Yes, they stop you from being electrocuted, but they also stop airflow. Often this is a weak point in your wall, and if it wasn't done correctly, which in a lot of older homes it was not, the air can move right through that outlet. So as soon as you block it and you do that across your whole house, you may be blocking a hole about this big leading from the outside of the house to the inside. That's a lot of air exchange that you're paying for. Rainwater harvesting, this one I'm super passionate about as well. There's only so much time though. Main thing I want to say is you could build your own rain tank. This is called an IBC tote. It costs about $100 to get a clean one ready to go, and you can make them go into each other. You can connect the fronts of them with common plumbing parts. So a very cool way for you to build your own without paying hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars, and allows you to capture the water off your roof and then put it to the garden. Yes, there's things to know about things like should you have tar shingles? Probably not. But at the end of the day, if you're even still collecting the tar shingle water off your roof, it's still not bad in terms of, hey, there's always bad in our water, whether it's chlorine and fluoride or whether it's the trace carcinogens off your shingles. I say go for the rainwater harvesting. Put the power back in your hands.
Kenton, sorry to interrupt. Just noticing the time.
Yeah.
If we want to have a few minutes for Q&A,
Hey,
if sorry.
we no, absolutely. I knew this would happen. I was like, oh, there's so much to speak on. Home utilities, I wasn't actually going to go too deep into. I was just going to mention the main 5 utility systems. And then the rest, we already kind of talked about some of these things. I already primed you guys on food forestry and already primed you on some of the square foot gardening, hugelkultures, and the herb spiral. And the rest is just pictures to go with it. So why don't we turn the floor open? While waiting for a few questions, I'm going to flip through some of my pictures to see if there's a couple ones I really want to talk to. But I'll wait for some of those Q&A to come through. Feel free to even unmute yourself with a question. I like seeing and hearing you guys, so feel free.
I don't have a question, but that is an awful lot of information. It's all incredibly exciting. I will tell you that I would love to do some of those things. And I'm in a mobile home in a park with resident deer and fawns. And so planting any kind of a food forest is just planting food for deer. And so it's a real challenge to figure out how to do both of those things, manage the wildlife without a fence and still have um, some sort of food system.
I wish I had a universal solution for you on the deer front. It is one that many people face. One cost-effective way is to use chicken wire with a couple wooden posts and make that chicken wire circle fairly large around the tree. And they can reach in and nibble on some of the leaves per se, but as that tree grows, there's always a crown that they can't reach, and that's that getting it past that critical stage. Another fencing option that's a little more secure is using pallets. You can put three of them together in a triangle or four of them to make a square. It allows the wind to still move through, some light, and that little tree will actually shoot up for the sun even faster because it thinks it's in a shady environment and it will try to shoot over. So there's another little power tip for trying to keep the deer away from the tree. Any other questions? Come on, there must be questions. We covered a lot of material. Maybe you have a specific problem, or maybe you have something you've tried and you want some advice from. We have one here saying, I want to put a few solar panels on a shed to provide a little electricity for my off-grid lot. Aside from lithium batteries, which lead batteries are best bang for buck and longevity? So that is a loaded question. Battery technology is always improving and changing. I myself live in an off-grid house, and the batteries that I chose to go with are lead carbon batteries. The lithium ones are better in terms of like amount of charge, but they're very costly, and there's not enough lithium in the world, to be honest. So there's a whole other debate about what materials should be used and which recycling centers are there. But if you're looking for just my personal recommendation, after my hunt through my battery options, I chose lead carbon because they can go to -40. They are kind of halfway point in between a regular lead acid battery and a lithium battery for charge and discharge cycles, and the cost was about in the middle too. So that was my personal choice. Yeah, actually, you're welcome. Well, I'm waiting for another question. Feel free to keep typing or unmute yourself and stick up a hand. But I'll just mention this picture here. Talking about how do we put animals to work for us is a very important part of this. Design the work out. So challenge yourself to go, what animal would normally have been in this landscape and what could it do? And I think grazing animals are a fantastic opportunity for us to not raise animals but raise grasslands. Bison used to roam across much of Canada and parts even of across larger North America. So I think it's important to go, how do we replicate a system if that was what was here before? We can kind of cheat the system by putting extra fencing in place and putting animals into each of these pastures strategically to allow a grassland to actually regrow. And you'll see a bunch of biodiversity, you'll see soil building, you'll have healthier grass, and you'll have healthier animals. So there's a little power tip for the animal people out there. We're at 8 on the nose, and there's no more questions. Can we come and visit your tiny home and land? Well, it's funny you say that because I just sent out to my newsletter an invite. We have a solstice party on Saturday, and the weather isn't looking that great, to be honest. But I did put the call out saying if someone is in Kelowna area, if they want to come out, we're inviting some friends, we're inviting the neighbors to see the sun down and have a fire. So if you're in my area, you're more than welcome. I'm going to just jump ahead to the very end of this around if you want to learn more. Obviously, there's so much to teach. I really focus on two different ways of reaching people now. I guess three. The first one is online, and the second one is in person with courses, and the third is through consultations. So the in-person retreats, they're where it's at, in my opinion. You get to learn hands-on together. You get to get the skill sets in beautiful locations. This is where we ran the last one just a couple weeks ago. Food, fun, inspiration, community, you name it. Yeah. You also get the online course as a bonus, so you don't have to try to write down all the information, which you might notice is a bit of a problem. It's too much to know. I also made up a discount code, which everyone here is welcome to use. The discount code is FTF for First Things First, 100, and it will get you $100 off one of our retreats. I did put a time limit on it. I find this helps people make decisions because otherwise you go, oh yeah, I can use that, and then you forget and you don't do it. So this coupon code is only good for a week. So take the time and think about it. We have a retreat set for next year in BC. I'm thinking about running another one, but it's just the one for now. And then the online course is the same thing in terms of all the content that's there. It's a growing library of courses. You get a community of people. We meet once a month. And you also get a one-on-one call with me to help you out on your journey wherever you're at. You can use the same discount code to get $100 off the online course. If you want the individual one-on-one support, I love going to people's properties and helping them. This is one student I helped in southern Alberta to build a wind-proofed garden that would also be proof from her dogs using low budget We built basically a fence system out of pallets. It was really fun. This is another client where we built a nature sanctuary out of her property in her parents' honor who passed away. She wanted to see the land put to good use, so we were building all sorts of things like a compost for her to practice the sustainability angle at a personal level and also create habitat in the larger landscape. Another client, this one's in the States, helping them address water problems and their landscape eroding. We built little mini beaver dams at all these points where water was starting to be visible, and that stops that water from becoming a problem in the torrential rains that come. Sometimes I do big stuff like this. This is fun, getting an excavator, doing a whole landscape design. Most people are on acreages or smaller lots, but something for everyone. And that's all my shtick. I hope you guys got a lot of value out of the talk tonight. It was a pleasure to share an hour with you and hopefully put a couple ideas in your head and get you stoked. Kathy, I see you got an extra question here. You said, how do you feel about dry creek bed to divert water away from sidewalk? Absolutely. I've even seen people illegally cut the curb and bring the water into areas for plants to grow. And there's examples of people doing this and then later being approved for it, so to say. So I can't tell you to go and cut a curb. Unfortunately, I might get in trouble if I tell you to do that. But there's lots of opportunity to siphon water off of our infrastructure systems we've built to drain water. Just be a little cautious about where you're putting it because it could backfire on you. So lots of little tips there to probably dive deeper into. You're welcome, Julia. My pleasure. I'll pass the floor back to you guys to close, wrap up, say what you need.
Great. Thank you so much. That was just so interesting. A ton of information, like you said, really inspiring. I'll keep it quick. We just have a couple of quick announcements. For those who live locally, we have our Views and Tales Club meeting will be this coming Tuesday, June 24th. It runs from 7 till 8:30 at night. And this month we'll be discussing a book by David Miller, the former mayor of Toronto. His book is called Solved: How the World's Great Cities Are Fixing the Climate. And you can check our website to register for that or for more information. Tomorrow evening, the Regional District is having a community wildfire resiliency plan open house. So that's tomorrow, June 20th from 5 till 8 at their office in Penticton on Martin Street. And last of all, we won't be hosting deep dives during the summer, but instead we'll be bringing our booth to various events. So look for us at farmers markets in Summerland, Penticton, and Naramata, and drop by for a chat and meet our new summer student. We look forward to seeing you again in September when we'll be resuming our deep dives. And meanwhile, unless Margaret or Laurie have any other announcements, we just wish you a great summer.
Happy gardening.
Thanks, one and all.